Like to go ahead and call to order today's Policy Review Committee meeting on June 20th, 2024 at 1 p.m. Mr. Gaither, will you please call the roll?
Representing Educational District 6 and Chair of this committee, Ms. Isha Collins.
Present.
Representing Educational District at Large Seat 7, Mr. Alfred Chivy Brooks. Representing Educational District at Large Seat 8, Ms. Cynthia Briscoe Brown. I also want to acknowledge our superintendent, our deputy superintendent, our general counsel, and our special assistant to the superintendent.
Great, thank you. Thank you all so much. I will now take a motion to approve today's agenda. So moved. Okay, properly moved by Cynthia Briscoe Brown, seconded by Sherry Brooks. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I will now entertain a motion to approve the minutes from last month's policy review meeting.
So moved.
Properly moved by Cynthia Briscoe Brown, second by Sherry Brooks. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We will now turn it over for our first discussion item, which is a presentation and update on student discipline policies and practices. Okay. Absolutely. Sounds great. Sounds good. We will switch. We will go to item B first, which is the presentation on the potential creation of a student's Bill of Rights. I will now turn it over to Dr. CT and Dr. Ho to make today's presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I am Dr. Kyra Caldwell Templeton, Program Director of Student Engagement.
Hi, Dr. CT here. I'm Al Pacino Hogue from the Strategy and Engagement Office. We rise to bring an update to you about the work that has happened over the past year and a half around the Student Bill of Rights. Our agenda is fairly short today, but we hope that by the time we are done, you have a good sense of where we've been, the impetus for this work, and the potential going forward. You can see our agenda. We'll start off with a little bit of research of how we sort of decided to create a Student Bill of Rights and why we think this is the right step to approach. So on the screen now, there's a lot of information here, so I will actually just walk through this a little bit just so everybody's oriented. What you see in front of you is the spectrum of student voice activity. This is research that talks about students as stakeholders and collaborators with adults. As you look at the spectrum, as you travel from left to right, you go from students being heard to students taking on more leadership roles. If you think about what happens most often day to day in our schools, most of the interaction and collaboration that happens with the adults and students at APS and most schools across the country sit in the first two boxes, the expression and consultation. That is, we're asking students what they think, how they feel, and we're asking them to sort of perform, right? As you move to the right, we're asking a little bit more of students. We're asking them to actually be part of the process as we are framing problems, as we're thinking about potential solutions, and we're asking them to take co-ownership in how these different strategies are implemented. So what you can clearly assume is that as you move from left to right, there is a great deal more that is being asked of adults. And that is that we're asking adults to look at students as true partners. We're asking adults to demonstrate trust in what we hear from students. And we're also asking adults to be willing to do some public learning. And where we don't have the answer, be willing to work with students and grapple through some very tough decisions. So there is no necessarily right or wrong place to be, but this shows you that on a day-to-day, these are the various sort of boxes that we can see the relationship happening between students and adults. So I want to take you back a couple of years. Back in summer of 2022, members of the board, as well as some senior leaders and some community stakeholders, I believe, traveled to the Northeast to participate in what is called the Public Education Leadership Program, PELP. PELP is a two-summer process where districts from across the country come together and work in individual teams to figure out what are some of the roadblocks that get in the way of us establishing or really achieving the mission that we have set forth for the district. That group that traveled to Harvard that summer worked together for 3 days, I believe it is, and they identified a problem of practice. For those who are viewing online, a problem of practice basically is, what are those things that get in the way of you doing your work? And so the group that attended the PELP came up with this problem of practice that you see on your screen today. Essentially, APS does not consistently demonstrate that it values student and family assets and voice in the classroom and in the district decision making, and as a result, we are not meeting the needs of all students, particularly those who are Black and brown. So this is the problem of practice that group of stakeholders that traveled from APS to PELP came up with. That same group also identified a theory of action, and again, for a general understanding, a theory of action essentially sort of lays out the steps that you think are necessary in order for you to achieve a goal. That theory of action that came out of that group was that if we center students by developing trusting relationships with students across the district and creating systems and structures that foster culturally responsive and joyful learning experiences, and committing to progress monitoring and making adjustments as needed, then APS will consistently demonstrate that it values students' assets, voice, and choice in the classroom, and as a result, we will meet the needs of all students, particularly those who are Black and brown. So that is the theory of action that was sort of decided upon. We believe that the Student Bill of Rights is the vehicle by which we can operationalize this theory of action, and we'll walk you through how that Student Bill of Rights can bring this to fruition.
Thank you, Dr. Chino. So what is a Student Bill of Rights? When we think about it at its core, it is a set of rights, fundamental principles, and guidelines. What do students truly deserve in Atlanta Public Schools? And we asked them that question when we did our research. So here is a list of a description of what a Bill of Rights is. It's a bellwether, it's a tool, it's a guide, and a steady measure. I'll take a second for you to kind of look at that for yourselves. And as Dr. Chino mentioned, it's a way for us to really operationalize student voice in the schools and in the district. We really want to emphasize students as partners to build school culture. So thinking about this, where can students play a role as partners in developing the school community environment and to develop a true community of practice? So with this, we had to reach out to our stakeholders. And so you see our different stakeholder groups listed here and the ways that we reached out to them, from students, staff, families, and the community. So of course, it started with our wonderful Student Advisory Council in the fall of 2022 up until the present. They were very instrumental in us doing research on what students wanted, because they do represent the voices of all of our students here in the district. We did various surveys. English and Spanish versions were distributed. Focus groups. We had a special advisory committee that included students in the drafting of the verbiage for the Student Bill of Rights. And of course, we recently had our Student Leadership Conference in March of this year. And it was also, that conversation was broached in 2023 as well. For staff engagement, our Go Team Summit we had in September. We also presented to the CELT team in November of last year. We did surveys, cluster advisory teams, et cetera. Teachers advisory, expanded cabinet was our most recent presentation. And then of course, the families and the community, again at the Go Team Summit. Community meetings, district and executive committee, and our Let's Talk, that's an ongoing initiative. So as Chino mentioned earlier, sorry, there's a fly flying around. As Chino mentioned earlier, we wanted to really place our engagement with our stakeholders on this spectrum. And even though it looks linear, it can be approached in an unbundled format. So it doesn't have to be always expression and we're moving to leadership. In some way, shape, or form, we can just focus on leadership or partnership or expression when appropriate. So on this spectrum, we kind of place our engagements through the surveys, through our focus groups, through other feedback avenues. to really see, are we living up to this true spectrum of student voice in this initiative? Here's a map of our clusters on where we sought out feedback. And there's a key there that demonstrates survey feedback or touch points versus the focus group touch points. So we wanted to make sure after we presented to the cabinet, a question was asked about like, how do we know who was involved? And so this map was created just so we can have a visual of who we spoke to. Okay, so feedback's data collection here, you'll see the list of students that we spoke to via survey or focus groups. We also was pushed in one of our community meetings to really focus on elementary and middle school. We can't have a student bill of rights and we're only hearing from the voices of high school students. And so we also had the opportunity to visit some elementary schools and middle schools as well. So we can do a drum roll. Dr. Chino is gonna pass out, thank you. Dr. Chino is gonna pass out our draft 1.0 of the Student Bill of Rights. As you look at this draft, I want you to think about what do you notice and what do you wonder, and just kind of keep that top of mind as we progress through the rest of the presentation. So I'll give you about a minute to review it. And as mentioned earlier, this was co-created with our students that sat on our special advisory committee, which was very, very important to us. So keep those noticings and wonderings in mind as we continue through our wrap up and our next steps. So here is a list of, or our phases rather, that we have developed. And we have completed phase 1, which is us going through and really engaging with our stakeholders, get feedback, and to develop a draft. And then next we're gonna really dive deep into phase 2 and phase 3 for our proposed next steps. So phase 2, we're suggesting a policy scan to be conducted based on the draft that has been presented. By August, we want to make any revisions with student input, of course. So we will start to leverage our new delegates on the Student Advisory Council through our ad hoc committees. September 2024, we want to create a playbook, because with this is not just going to be a poster on a wall. We want it to really go beyond that and really have a guidelines, expectations. What does it look like, sound like, and feel like in the school building? For phase 3, by September of 2024, we want to look at engaging with 6 pilot schools. So we have proposed pilot schools. We really want to leverage the coalition of the willing, those that have really shown engagement throughout. I've even received an email probably about 2 weeks ago, like, hey, we want to still be involved, from one of our elementary schools. So that was really exciting to hear, because even though we went from elementary all the way up to the high school level, they all had similar things to say about their input and what they felt like they deserved as students of Atlanta Public Schools. By December of 2024, we want to do a mid-year progress check-in of all the pilot schools. So doing it through a survey, some focus groups. What does it look like in action? What are ways that we can leverage the Student Bill of Rights in the schools? And phase 3 continued by January of 2025. Based on our focus groups and our mid-year checkpoint, we want to make sure that we adjust the playbook, make some tweaks, and continue the rollout. We'll identify end-of-year progress, April 2025, And by May, we would like to adjust the Student Bill of Rights playbook and present a final plan for district rollout. So we really want to see this implementation of the Student Bill of Rights and playbook in practice. That's the goal of the pilots. We want to be able to effectively plan to include student voice in everything that we do. I think is evident at the district level through our Student Advisory Council because they are seen on a larger scale. And it may be happening in pockets at other schools, but we want to kind of standardize it across the district. And we want to identify ways to also support the implementation of the Student Bill of Rights at the school level. So, how can we go beyond the poster? What will need to be true in the district in order for the Student Bill of Rights to inform practice and expand student voice? Where can students play the role as partners in developing a school environment that is a true community of practice? So that concludes our official presentation. We can open the floor for discussion. Please note that there is a section, an appendix section that kind of goes into detail the data that was presented as a result of our survey. Thank you.
This is great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Wanted to see if you, was there any questions? You have anything? Cynthia, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I know y'all have worked very hard with our students, and I suspect that we need to do a shout out here specifically to the Student Advisory Council, whose hands and hearts and voices I see all over this. And yet another great project from our Student Advisory Council and the wider group. I do have a couple of questions. First is I've only had a chance to look briefly at the appendix, but it looks like, particularly with reference to the survey, the vast majority of responses were from North Atlanta and Jackson, to the extent that we only had 1 or 2 responses from some of the other clusters, and about 2/3 of the responses came from those 2 clusters. Was there a reason for that? Did we try to reach out to all the clusters? And I'm particularly puzzled by that because on this map, and I can't see it very well, but the map you showed, it doesn't look like the survey, the digital survey even happened in the North Atlanta cluster. There's not a little computer there, but so maybe I say I can't see it very well. But can you just describe a little bit about how you reached out to various schools?
Absolutely, yes, and that's an error. There should be a computer graphic there on that map, so we'll make sure that is rectified. So because it wasn't a mandate, right, so we shared it with our Student Advisory Council. We created little flyers for them to pass out throughout the school. We also tried to leverage our SGAs, so going through our advisor collaborative, we've been doing some work with them at that level. And a lot of this was based off of their personal engagement and investment in the initiative. But I have a lot of miles on my vehicle that we went to schools and had conversations in small groups that may not be represented on the digital survey, which I went back to this chart here that emphasizes the focus groups that did happen. In some places, you will see that focus groups happen in tandem with a survey. But in certain situations where, because like for instance, for our young people, our middle school and our elementary, they didn't have access to the survey because we thought it was not age appropriate. So we had more smaller group conversations with them, and that was more of our qualitative data. And then Dr. Chino could probably speak on the work that was done prior to my arrival last summer.
I echo your shout out to the Student Advisory Council, but I would also give a shout out to the students at Hank Aaron, because that was the first group of students that we spoke with. And they told us exactly what their experience in APS has been. And it was great because that conversation actually helped us to shape our engagement strategy going forward. So I do want to shout out the staff over there for opening the doors to us. But you know, a lot of, as Dr. CT said, a lot of this was actually qualitative data. As you all know, especially this past year, we had a lot of conversation about survey fatigue. So we didn't think it was a good use of energy and time to sort of continue to push a survey when we had so many different surveys going on in the district. So we really relied on the survey as sort of an additional opportunity for students to give input, but it was the focus groups as well as the student leadership symposium that happened in March, where we had students from every high school present that also gave us a chance to not only give us feedback about what they believe should go in, but that we actually took the very first draft and had the students to sort of ink it up for us there. So we feel confident that while there's not necessarily 100% of students that have given specific replies to our survey, we do feel like that we've created many opportunities for students who are interested in giving us feedback to do so. Sometimes that was setting up in a media center. Sometimes that was at lunchtime, setting up a table. Sometimes just catching students in the middle of the hallways. So we've tried to not be disruptive to the school day, but to also make sure that students had an opportunity to give us some feedback.
I'm particularly concerned that in the appendix it says only one Hispanic student participated. And I'm hoping that maybe we can be very intentional about reaching out to our Hispanic students, our English language learners, those who, because I think this is particularly important for them. A lot of the aspects of this apply to them in ways different and greater even than for some of the others in our student body. I think I've heard that Multilingual Services is creating basically a Hispanic Student Advisory Council, and it might be that we can reach out to them and see if we can really deeply get them involved. And one more, and then I'll be done, I promise. The other thing that occurs to me is, have you interfaced with the legal department at all on this?
So we did have a touch base with Erica Long, but not our legal department, no.
Not specifically with
No, we
legal.
did. So when this idea first came up, Nina and I did have a conversation, and I did speak with her team about it. You'll notice on maybe slide 6 where we talk about what is a student bill of rights. One of the important pieces that we wanted to make sure that we add is that this is not a legal document. And so we did add that language there because we know the state and the federal government has guidelines about what rights students have. So we're not looking to replace that or to trump that. So we did have that conversation. That's why we added that language
And
there.
as a lawyer, I saw that. I don't see it on the actual Bill of Rights. And I think this is a great idea. I want us to do it, but I don't want us to potentially open ourselves to any exposure there that we don't already have. And I expect that that's mostly a matter of wording, and that with some very simple language changes that we'll be able to make that clear and empower our students and help them advocate for themselves without opening ourselves up to potential for lots and lots and lots of legal action. And again, I want to make really clear, I'm not opposing this, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I think it's a wonderful idea.
Understood.
But I do think there's some finessing in several areas that we probably need to do. So draft 1.0 is a great idea,
Thank you.
and that's all I've got.
Yeah, how y'all doing? Thank you so much for this presentation and for this initiative. Couple questions that I have. Have any students reviewed this document as it is currently curated, and what was their feedback to you guys?
Yes, so we presented this Bill of Rights, almost this version, not quite this version, to the students in March that attended the Student Leadership Symposium. We had about 100 students that were there. students from every high school. I presented along with the two students who were actually on our writing committee for the actual wording of this, and we presented it to the student body. So we had students that helped us create it, we had students that responded to it, and in those comments that we got in March, that's how we reached this version that you see in front of you today.
And what was the feedback from the students?
Overall, the students, so throughout this process, we've not run into many people who said, I don't think we need this, particularly students. Students generally appreciated this opportunity to have something that they could point to, so they felt like they knew specifically if a situation that affected them directly, or in their words, if a peer was affected by a certain situation, they felt like the Bill of Rights could be something they could point to as a point of conversation or defense, however you want to think about it. Some of the language, can you go to it? Some of the language that students kind of talked about was this notion of advocacy and due process. That was a big one. They wanted to make sure that there was fairness in the experiences that they were receiving, again, themselves and other students. Some of our students, including our Student Advisory Council, often talked about, because they are students who they're doing well in the system, their concern often wasn't about them. They felt like they would be fine. Their concern was about students who may not be as strong academically or who may be missing class or those type of students. So they were looking for language or rights in here that could be useful for those students in particular. So that was one of the things that stood out to me. And students talked about, and we had this conversation with our expanded cabinet, students talked about the things that we would want them to talk about. They talked about their academic experiences. They wanted to make sure that what they were learning was relevant to them and was interesting to them and was useful, in their words, to their future. And we captured that in the deeper learning. They talked about costs associated with any activity or having a number of options for them available depending on what their interests were. We captured that with the equitable access. So everything that we sort of have been thinking about and sort of the collective input, we heard pretty universally, no matter the school, no matter the cluster, no matter the students. Students were really thinking about themselves, but in a lot of ways thinking about their peers in the district.
What was different in the version that you showed them in contrast to this one?
Yes.
Nothing substantive? Is that-
No, just wordsmithing here and there.
Got you. My concern on this piece is, could this be perceived as performative to the students if we include language that says, this is not legally binding, right? And your reference was, and I love the spirit of it, the ethos of it, right? Okay, our students want to be able to look out for the most vulnerable peers that they have, right? And I can imagine a space or a place where, let's say certain kids are being allowed to go to a field trip because they got a certain score on a test, or they have a certain GPA, or they have a certain grade level in a class. And you've got these kids who are doing well in the class, and they're looking at their friend who is not allowed to go on the trip because their grade didn't meet the mark. And so now they feel like, you know what, I want to advocate for my friend to be able to have an equitable access to this experience as well. And they're going to beat the table about it, and they're going to advocate for their friend. And then they're going to be told, well, that Student Bill of Rights, it looks good, but guess what? At the end of the day, as a teacher or as an administrator, I still have the right to decide who has access and who doesn't. And so your belief that you have equitable access to this opportunity really doesn't exist. We just made it look like it did. And so, for me, I love, that we're willing to do this. But if we're going to give students something to stand on, then I feel like we got to stand on it too. And that's where I have a little bit of conflict in doing something that our students won't be able to really, defend their positions on. And I think that will eventually break trust.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that was shared heavily with the students that were involved in this process as well. And that's where the work comes in. Because it could have been a situation where we're just creating the Student Bill of Rights. It's a poster, like we said, and then that's it, right? So this is, we're bringing it here to get out of that stance that you're referencing that is not real, right? So we have to leverage, and this is where also the playbook is going to come into practice We have to leverage our school leaders, ways that if you have a field trip, have you involved students in the decision-making for them to attend? So that's part of it as well.
So I think of, and this is my last thing, what out of this intention as a policy committee could we be having conversation about or have looking to put in place to give more actionability, if you will, behind this? And one of the first things that comes to mind is our conversation about student voice on the dais, and potentially having a student representative on the board. But beyond that, are there other things that maybe we should be entertaining for conversation?
I appreciate that question and the previous comment because this was probably as involved as it was. This is the easiest part. We're creating any policy. That's the easy part, to get it on paper. To make it live is going to require a lot of change. And we know that this is happening, as Dr. CT said, already at some schools. Some schools are like, oh yeah, we do this already. Some students are saying, I feel like I have that already. Fantastic. The hard work is to make sure every student in every classroom and hallway feels that way. And so I don't shy away from that messiness because it is going to be messy, but I appreciate your question because it's going to take a layered approach of us making sure that we have the right policies even for this to stand, for us to make sure that we have the right mindsets among our adults at the central office and in our schools. And if the mindsets are not there, then we have to decide what sort of capacity building we're going to do, what sort of trainings are going to be necessary. And we also have to decide systematically where this lives. And I don't mean just in the student handbook, though I think that's where it goes as a reference point. But where does this live? Does this live with the strategy and engagement office? Does this live with our student discipline team? Does this live? Where does this live? And the more we can be intentional about those tough questions, then we create a system where we can uphold these things. So students aren't going to say, I can't advocate. They're going to understand the way in which you can advocate. They're going to understand in our school, this is what we mean by privilege that comes with field trips. There's a required conversation that is ongoing with this type of work. It's sort of moving very, very slow so that when these situations come up, it's not the first time that you've seen it. And that's part of the reason that we have the playbook. The playbook, as we are conceptualizing it, actually creates many of those opportunities for students and staff to sort of build together. This isn't something that's coming down from the central office to say this is how you must do it. We're asking schools, based upon your culture in your school, how can you bring to life the Student Bill of Rights? And so that's the hard work. That's work that's not going to happen in a semester. That's not work that's going to happen in a year. But if we're talking about a Student Bill of Rights, much like the Bill of Rights for this country, we're still working to get it right. Yeah. So we're not going to get this right away, but if we're making the commitment and we show our students that we are making the commitment, they're going to be with us. And I think our students are much more flexible than sometimes we give them credit for, that if we have those conversations and involve them at the beginning of the process, when those moments of tension come up, it's not so much that, they're not upholding the Bill of Rights. It's back to that public learning I talked about. We're all trying to figure out how to make this work best for all of our students. So that's the approach that I recommend that we take, to really look to see if we have the right policies and then be very serious about the capacity building that's going to be necessary in the district, both for adults and students, and then be willing to do the messy work of trying to figure out how we can implement this in our day-to-day, every day.
Thank you so much for all of that. My last thing is I would encourage us to, as we engage in this work, take a deep look at the impact that a Student Bill of Rights may or may not have on CCRPI scores, specifically around culture, climate, and those type of things, so that, should we see a market benefit from this work, that you all are able to point back at some other benefits of doing what you're doing. So thank you all very much.
Yep. Great questions and comments. I appreciate that. And just kind of hearing the dialogue and the timeline, I think some things to think about from this committee and from the board, to your point, Board Member Brooks, is how do we integrate some of like the procedural pieces where it don't necessarily has to be so like here. So we really should be thinking about how we incorporate this into our own board policies on how we're, the expectations and guidance we've set for ourselves. And so that may be a space for us to think about really codifying this from a board and like the whole the legal piece of it and what that entails. I mean, the reality is our students aren't running to the policy, running to our policy manual, but we definitely, for the cover basis, can ensure that it at least.
If you had a Mr. Brooks governing class, you definitely go into the student handbook. Like, they
Yeah.
are notorious for administration.
Exactly. So things like that, I think is for us to consider. But then also, as we talk about just in terms of the immersion of this document throughout, and I know you mentioned a couple of documents. I think we really just need to start thinking about it, how we even encapsulize this with the mission and vision that is everywhere. And is this the third? You know what I'm saying? Is this the third legs to the stool that we definitely want to push out as a district, as we say? What our mission is and our vision, what our vision and our mission and what our student bill of rights entails. And so it's not necessarily a conversation about what department it lives in. It really is about it lives everywhere in the district. And I think from there you get more of the buy-in and that attachment. Board Member Brooks, I think you're talking about because I agree as well. We don't want it to be just another a document. We really want students to look at it as like, wait, you all said that I can have, I can influence decisions, and I don't feel that way, and really being able to have that buy-in, I think it's something for us to truly think about. So from us, I think, you have anything, Cynthia, you want to add? Okay.
Actually, I do. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
go ahead. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I am completely agree with everything Ishay said, that, maybe we should consider making it a policy. We then need to think about, though, what that does to that playbook and whether those then have to become regulations. We don't want it to get so inflexible.
Right.
Because the board has to read it and approve, this committee has to approve it for first read, and then we have to have 30 days, and then we have to go on final approval in order to change anything. But if we can find some middle ground between that sort of inflexibility, which is necessary in our policy process, but can still raise it up to the level of significance that it deserves, I think that's a good idea.
If it's okay, Madam Chair, just one potential advantage of making it a board policy, I think reminds me of the equity work and the equity policy, and how the equity policy is a lens that guides so much of our decision-making. If we're sitting as a leadership team and deciding on access to curriculum and instruction for students, as a policy, we're reminded that students have a right to deeper learning. They have a right to advanced coursework. So it's just one potential positive from highlighting it to that level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Yeah. So I guess what would be the best next steps for us in?
Well, we want to inform you of the status and just get feedback from you all, so we have some notes and next steps. And then just to engage in the discussion of it possibly becoming a policy, what would that look like? Because we did some research and it's not really being done out there. And so there's no map for us or a blueprint for us to kind of go by or borrow from. And so it will be up to us to create what's the best next step. And one, from what I'm hearing, is to explore the possibility of it becoming a policy, and then how do we ensure that it is flexible enough for us to make adjustments, because the students that were instrumental in creating this are going to be transitioning, right? So we want it also to be reflective of and relevant to our current student body. So it goes beyond the person, the position, the poster.
Got it. Great. Thank you.
One other thing in terms of potential next steps and how we can make this thing have legs, because the students are expecting that from us, so I appreciate your openness to it. I can see this also being the root of a strategic plan. Your example of using this as a reference point when policies or things are coming down the line, but if we are going to build a strategic plan for the next 5 years or whatever it is for the district, what a great way to root a strategic plan on student voice. The Student Bill of Rights is student voice in action, or an opportunity for student voice to be in action. And so that could be another place that the Student Bill of Rights lives and serves as a foundation for a strategic plan that that the district will look at, for multiple years. So I would just offer that as an opportunity as well.
Thank you. Thanks. So I guess next steps will be to be determined. To be determined.
Yeah, I would say to be determined, and then also to continue the conversation of wordsmithing the language,
Okay.
ensuring that we have the legality statement there at the base of the draft, and then whatever the process is for policy to be written and developed, to include us in that conversation as well.
Okay. And then I would say definitely look into whether it's necessary to have that legality statement at the bottom, because I do think it, to Board Member Brooks' point, it could make it more, like you said, we say performative than
yeah.
really like the buy-in that we want, versus if we get down to a point of really also codifying it in a general form as a policy, you can reference it, right?
Yes.
You can put here like reference policy, blah, 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 and that at least, still gives some, direction without it, because that, without it possibly taking away from like the emotional benefit we want to make sure it has.
Correct.
And I will say, if the board is thinking about codifying this in a board policy, like a big P policy, yeah, I can see that maybe the legality statement does need to be here. But I think Dr. CT and Dr. Hoger, right, is that the real test is going to be in the implementation, because these are pretty high-level commitments of rights that can be open to interpretation and that are in tension with each other as well. For instance, the right for one student to freely express themselves may interfere with another student's right to feel emotionally safe. So, we're going to have to do some good thinking and some good culture work on what this looks like in real life.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Madam Deputy, which presentation should we take next? Okay, great. We will now move forward with the presentation and update on student discipline policies and practices. We have Dr. Chelsea Montgomery joining us and Mr. Lincoln Woods. Dr. Lincoln Woods? Dr. Lincoln Woods? Mr. Lincoln Woods joining us tonight, this afternoon. I'll turn it over to you all.
Not Dr. quite yet, hoping for December, but I appreciate the putting it out there.
Yeah.
So good afternoon, board members, Interim Superintendent Dr. Battle, Deputy Superintendent Erica Long, senior leadership that is here, and especially our community members, both in person and online. So we put this presentation together. Discipline is a big topic. We really tried to focus into the policy lens of discipline. So there could be a lot more things you'd like to know, and we're happy to get you those answers. We just tried to stay really in that kind of policy space when it comes to discipline. So we're going to look through review a few things that were from the audit that was done last fall and the changes that we're making going forward from that audit briefly. Some look at some policy, share some current data with you, and then share some additional considerations that kind of from the national landscape that we think the board might be interested in. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Woods until the end.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Montgomery. Greetings again, all board committee members, illustrious superintendent, and all other members. We are happy to conduct this presentation today. We're really excited about a couple of things that has transpired. As you can see, this slide deals with our audit findings, and it was really, a blessing because as I embarked upon this position, it gave me a lens starting off of what needed to be addressed and what were some of those intentional important things that needed to be included in our code of conduct, as well as some trainings. Trainings and consistency is our top goal this year as it relates to administrators. We wanted to make sure that they were well trained, that the trainings were available, and that there was some consistency in management around those trainings. For example, principals and assistant principal trainings will be updated to include the progressive discipline policy, interventions, and behavior intervention plans. Teacher training recommendations were also addressed this year. That will be a separate annual training for staff that enter discipline incidents. So historically, it's always been a focus on assistant principals, those individuals, those foot soldiers in the school buildings that are doing that heavy lift as it relates to discipline. This year, and based on the audit findings, we realized that there are a lot of other stakeholders that deal with discipline, from the administrators, of course, the teachers on a daily basis, as well as discipline clerks, and even other individuals like graduation coaches and counselors that get involved with discipline. So again, we're happy that all of those individuals will be trained, and those trainings will be accessible via one of our portals, Ellis, this year, as well as incident entries. Now, as it relates to that audit finding, and I won't spend a lot of time on the incident entries, but it dealt with the guidelines and making sure that there weren't any violations in reference to how we enter our discipline referrals, in reference to those things that should be discreet, as well as the timing. If a student is involved in an incident, the turnaround time, as well as the due process that's involved with that incident. So those things will all be addressed as well with incident entries via Infinite Campus. So my department, Office of Student Discipline, we have created SOPs, and we're currently working on tracking systems and management to make sure that we do a better job at actually looking at Infinite Campus, discussing it, doing data digs and disaggregations on a weekly basis during our meetings. We also wanted to streamline the code of conduct. And in that, we meant in reference to making it an easier process for teachers, administrators alike to understand it and to better be able to sift through the student code of conduct, as well as the handbook and all the different definitions that it includes. And just a quick example of that is that we had a discipline leadership committee team, and it consists of principals, assistant principals, a lot of CLL district stakeholders. Ms. Montgomery was a part of that committee, as well as we even had teachers, even a disproportionality staff member. And we heard their voice. We met on a monthly basis, and they were helping us to guide some of the things that we need to include or address in the student code of conduct. So we've heard their voice, we included that, we addressed it. All along, we were also trying to make sure that we were in alignment with the state. And by that, I mean, if the state says that for a particular infraction, it's a level 2 or a level 3, we wanted to make sure that APS's student code of conduct matched that. Now, we were very considerate and flexible in reference to elementary. And by that, I mean, in some instances, the state may have an elementary infraction, or I would say a code of conduct. Let's take dress code, skipping, tardies at a level 2. It may even be able to escalate all the way to a level 3. Well, we felt that that wasn't necessary, and we did utilize some level of flexibility. And while that may result in a mild infraction, a level 1, we don't want things like dress code and some of those other mild infractions to escalate to a level 3. However, for the most part, because our aim and our goal was to be in alignment with the state, that was our main project. That was our goal. If the state had something in reference to weapons at a level 3 and there wasn't a level 1 or level 2, you'll see that embedded in the student code of conduct as a serious infraction or offense. If you look at the third bullet in reference to reformatting and highlighting our progressive discipline matrix and interventions, we were really pleased and proud of the way the code of conduct looks this year in our student handbook. And by that I mean we've actually included the progressive discipline in our book. Mild, moderate, and serious you will actually see under the infraction, as well as we included the progressive discipline and progressive discipline interventions that are both reflected right up under the infraction. Again, like to give examples. An example of that would be if, let's say, academic dishonesty. You will see up under academic dishonesty in reference to our intervention as to whether or not that's a mild, moderate, or serious infraction. Up under some of what most of us would look at as punitive offenses, like OSS and ISS, now in the student code of conduct, right below ISS and OSS, you will see where we've provided 3 or 4 examples of discipline, progressive discipline interventions. So what we're doing is trying to get both our teachers and administrators and anyone else that enters discipline to reflect, just to take a few minutes or a few seconds to reflect on, is this an opportunity for an alternative to suspension? Is this an opportunity to maybe not administer or impose ISS or OSS and to possibly use something like a restorative practice or a restorative circle, leaning on a teacher buddy, or even calling on a counselor, referring them? So those are things that are incorporated in the Code of Conduct this year. Okay. All right. Okay, this slide deals with our discipline summary, and as you can see, it gives a landscape of the suspensions by grade, and this is kindergarten through 12th. I know primarily we're focused on kindergarten through 5th, and their suspensions, and as you can see, especially with kindergarten, it's extremely low. And I know one may ask, well, why is there any percentage for kindergarten? And again, when you look at state codes and being in alignment, I'm sorry.
Is there any way we can get this on Assembly? We've got the community wanting it. Great, okay. Thank you, sorry.
Okay, no problem. As you can see, we do have some suspension days. I know in speaking with several administrators this year, and even being a former elementary administrator myself, your goal is to never really suspend a kindergarten, a first, second, or third grader, even a fourth or fifth if you can help it. But there have been incidents of battery and even incidents of loaded weapons that have been so egregious that some days had to be imposed. When you look at 9th grade, that's a bar graph that really stands out. I always like to caution individuals that, yes, that is a grade that can be challenging, but also remember that sometimes those aren't true 9th graders. Sometimes it may reflect in the system that it's a 9th grader, but this could be a repeat student that really should be in 10th grade, and/or 11th. So sometimes those numbers are a little different as it relates to 9th. But 9th grade historically has always been kind of at the top of our list to address and to encourage and motivate to use alternatives to suspension, because we want to keep those students in school. That's literally their first experience in high school. And we also know that the dropout rates as it relates to 9th grade historically have been high. So we focus on doing as much as we can as it relates to alternatives to suspension for our 9th grade students. If you look at the next slide, it gives a landscape of our district, the total number of students for elementary, middle, and high school. Of course, we know our elementary students historically has always been the highest population of students at 25,891 students. And it also gives you an idea and a data breakdown in reference to how many students were given 1 day as opposed to 3 or 4 days, and even in some cases, 10 days. Oftentimes when you see 10, that meant that it was a necessary referral to an alternative to a tribunal hearing. All right, as it relates to suspensions in general, and this is dealing with our codes. This is our Office of Codes, Georgia, annotated, and it talks about pre-K through 3rd grade students not being expelled or suspended from school for more than 5 consecutive accumulative days during a school year without first receiving some level of multi-tiered systems of support. And that's where our work comes in our department under the Student Support Services with our MTSS coordinators, as well as other services of support that we try to provide the schools with in addressing some of these behaviors, being in a proactive way, such as response to intervention. And of course, there are a slew of other things that we do to address both academic and behavioral infractions. It does highlight, and this goes back to the suspension data that I mentioned, this requirement does not apply if the student possessed a dangerous weapon, firearm, and/or hazardous objects, or if the student's behavior endangers the physical safety of other students of school personnel. And then we went and we also did some research in reference to, well, let's just see. This is what we have in our code of conduct as it relates to Atlanta Public Schools, but what are some of the surrounding districts using or what's embedded in their code of conduct? And we found out that it was glaringly clear that the 6 surrounding districts, some much larger than us and some similar to our population, they all use both in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension to uphold, should I say, their student code of conduct and just keeping the building safe and secure. So that was, as you can see, Cobb, Gwinnett, DeKalb, Fulton, Clayton, and Douglas counties collectively all use in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension as a form of discipline. All right.
Right, as I see you taking in the data, there's a couple little things I want to point out. It does include charter partner schools, because I know we get that question. And then in addition, when you see that spike in 9th grade, especially if there are people listening online that are not from Georgia, in Georgia, your grade level is determined by your credits. So those could be overage, under credit 9th graders as well in that 9th grade column. So I just want to make sure that I put those caveats in the data. In addition, there are some other interesting considerations kind of on a national landscape. So these are some out-of-the-box things that I just think for the policy committee to know are happening across the country and in APS. So the first one is right now in APS, if a student, K5, K8, brings a loaded weapon, they are permanently expelled. So that we've had some challenges with that this year. So that's just something that I want to bring back up. In addition, in the state of Texas, I thought these were pretty interesting. If a student is identified as homeless or unhoused, that they cannot receive out-of-school suspension for the majority of offenses. Thought it was interesting and worth sharing, considering that we are in the policy committee space. Another one that they have that's pretty interesting in the state of Texas is that if a student is in de-facto custody or also is identified as homeless or unhoused, we should just have extra considerations for the best interest before you look at suspension, before you look at alternative school placement, things like that. So those are just kind of things on the national landscape. And then lastly, on the national landscape is to consider no out-of-school suspensions for tardy or skipping related offenses. There are some states that have started to adopt those as we are all really struggling with attendance. So I wanted to put those out there. In the grand scheme of things, I do want to highlight, we have a lot of work to do. I am not sleeping well at night with discipline, but we are trending in the right direction. Overall, our preliminary numbers with the state, we are down 2,372 days this year compared to last year, which is a decrease in out-of-school suspensions of 5.6%. Not much, but it is trending in the right direction, so we are moving well. Just some other relevant information related to student services. Student discipline, specifically with hearings and tribunals, will be located at the hub next year. So much more easily accessible to our families to attend those hearings, parking, access to the MARTA line. Also, the advantage of having student discipline at the hub is that we have all the additional available wraparound services right there for our families. So I'm pretty excited about being able to wrap our arms around our families that are working their way through the discipline process. And then one other thing is that we are ready to go with our threat assessment. I know this has been an ask of the board for a very long time, so we are ready to go. We are done. We're working through principal training and student service team training in August, so we are trying to keep that out of the discipline department realm, but I did think that was a relevant thing with this opportunity to bring up to the policy committee that we are done and ready. And with that, we will take any questions or comments.
Start on Ms. Ann. Mr. Brooks, you have any questions?
Yes, thank you so much for sharing this data with us. A couple questions. On slide 4, that says fiscal year 24 discipline summary, can you please explain what the numbers mean to the community?
So that is the number of suspension days per student. It's a rate, so it is the That's how you do the math for that. So suspension days per student enrolled in that grade in APS.
And is there any data on subgroups? Throughout all of the slides, I saw nothing breaking down Hispanic students, Black students, students with learning disabilities, students living with financial hardships. I saw none of that.
We have all of it. I just didn't want to bury the slides in data, but we can provide any of that that's requested, of course.
Oh, please dig up the dirt. Like
Sure.
That I think is one of the, just to be transparent with you, is one of the main areas of focus for us right now, specifically when we're looking at disproportionate suspension rates across race and things of that sort. So given what we're looking at today, we're not actually able to engage in that conversation.
We can put all that together and provide it. We have all of it.
Yeah, I remember we've have the data, just any updates would be really great. What, really quick before we move on to Cynthia, explain this data set again.
So this is basically, you take the number of suspension days divided by the number of total students in that grade level.
Gotcha.
It's considered the rate.
Okay. Go ahead, Cynthia?
But staying on this chart, in reality, it's not that every student in the 9th grade gets suspended 2.13 days. It's a very small number of students who are being suspended for a lot of days.
Yes, and actually, if you look at the next slide,
yeah.
yes, those 0 days are a little different. But we have at the top of this dashboard that our schools use have the number of students that have received no suspension days.
Okay. And I did have a question about that, actually. When it says 0 days OSS, are those students who received ISS?
Not necessarily. Some of it is unclosed incidents. That's not a very reliable category, in my opinion. So it's some yes, some have received alternatives.
So that
one's a
number,
little all
0
over the
days
place.
OSS, is students, is days in the discipline process, but not at OSS level.
Correct. Yes.
Got it. Because it's clearly not all of the other
It
students.
doesn't add
who
up, right?
received no suspension days. Okay, that was my other question.
Thank you for asking that question, because that helped clarify for me a little bit. I think something else that would be very helpful as well is to be able to differentiate how many days in students have received OSS versus ISS, because I think, we can't turn a blind eye to that. Very much as the, prison industrial system has moved from incarcerating people to having folks, what's the right terminology I'm trying to use right now, on house arrest,
House
if you will,
arrest,
under, public supervision, if you will. That becomes a new thing to have to address. So I don't want us to turn one blind eye into two.
Yeah, and I'll say too, Member Brooks, to that point, it was noted in our audit, the differences of schools that have ISS and don't have ISS, because some schools it's not an offering. It's a staff lift, as you know. You have to have a staff member assigned to that to offer that, and our schools have the autonomy to choose to or not to. So I do think that impacts. We have very few elementary schools that have ISS, so that I think that does skew them towards more OSS because we don't have that offering. I can't say that with certainty. But that was an area pointed out in the audit, was the inconsistency of schools having an ISS offering.
Do we have any feedback on those transition years from 4th to 5th?
No, 5th to 6th.
5th to 6th.
Well, correct. I'm sorry. From 5th to 6th and then 8th to 9th.
Like that.
Like, why such a big jump? And specifically, when I look at this, I'm looking at, K through 5, where, we've got the K through 3 prohibition on suspensions. You don't really have a huge leap from, 3rd to 4th, 4th to 5th. But when you go from that elementary to middle and then the middle to high, seems to be where we're having a disproportionate amount of issues.
I'll say the other interesting thing is if you look at our attendance data, those two spots are the exact same. It's the teeny little ones, it's the kindergartners, and then it is that 6th and 9th. Attendance looks just like that, which I also think is interesting.
I saw some data recently that spoke to the impact of students dropping out and how much more likely it is if they miss 4 to 5 days of school within a school year for whatever reason, suspension, sickness, whatever it is. What would be your suggestion based on having dug into the data for things that we can do from a policy standpoint to have a positive impact in getting our kids to school, pushing down these suspension rates, et cetera?
There's so many things. I'll let you go first.
So we are working on one project primarily for our 6th through 12th graders, and it's through a partnership with the At Promise Centers. And what we would like to do and offer is to have maybe hourly staff members so we can legitimately say that if a student was assigned 1 to 3 days OSS, instead of that student going home, they will have the luxury of going to this At Promise Center where they'll receive instruction. They provide free meals every day. They also have a lot of different programs, entrepreneurship, gardening, across the board. The location is a bit of a challenge in transportation, but we are working on trying to do at least a small level of piloting some schools that are interested in that.
Can you help me understand the man, that's so weighty. What would be the thinking behind us taking, instead of us, which I agree with, moving away from the out of school suspension, but then now forcing our kids to go into a program that's being facilitated by the Atlanta Police Department? Like, how do we think that's going to work in our community?
In reference to the At Promise Center,
Yes.
well, that's my lens. I would want to take the lead, and I've had this discussion. I've sat down with quite a few of the At Promise Center, managers, leaders, and that process of identifying the right teacher or the right staff member, they can also instruct, whether it's a special ed student with needs or disabilities, as well as a general ed student. I would like for our department, Atlanta Public Schools, similar to how we interview and we pick and hire teachers, I would be over that process, the hiring process of making sure that we have the right teachers in the right place at the At Promise Center.
I would encourage us to just be thoughtful of how it could be perceived as us perpetuating the school to prison pipeline by doing such a program. I would give us some serious thought. And I think it's very well intentioned. And in fact, I would say, the thought about agriculture, entrepreneurship, those are things that we should be offering to every kid every day in our schools, not something that you should have to get suspended for to get. So I appreciate both. But I do want us to be very thoughtful about that. In a community like Atlanta, I mean, this is, the civil rights and social justice hub of America. To think about doing something like that, I think would raise a lot of people's energy to maybe do something in the contrary. I digress.
Have you visited the At Promise Center?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just understand there are some great things that are happening there, right? But I think when we're talking about specifically not our kids doing this as an enrichment opportunity, but actually this is now a answer to a discipline issue. I think the premise is different. And so it's just something to be thoughtful of. I'm not saying it's all bad, but I am saying that I know how our community is, and I know how it will be seen. And I think there's some legitimacy to thinking about that. Like, how can we think about offering those same things in our school buildings? How can we think about resourcing our schools that are opting not to have in-school suspension offerings, have something there so that something like this is not necessarily the way that we go? I think we could all agree, like, there are times that kids maybe need to be in a different learning environment than the classroom, because maybe whatever it is that they have going on is being disruptive to their process as well as their peers. But also we don't want them outside of the school, right? And then also it's just a lot to think about.
Yeah. And just keep in mind, this is not something that will be abused. This is for, let's give an example. I won't call any school names, but a big group fight just transpired. And about 8 of those students, half of them may be affiliated with gangs. And we're in a position where those 8 students, we really don't want them to return to that particular high school, but at the same time, we don't want them sitting at home or being in the neighborhood, or worst case scenario, trying to connect back with each other. So this is more of a safe hub, individuals that have a partnership and they've done great work in the community, and it just gives them an outlet. So
I
it
receive.
definitely wouldn't be a normal situation.
Thank you. I'm still looking forward to getting that subgroup data though. Like I feel like that's honestly the part of the conversation, that's the meat of the conversation. And I mean, I don't know, is it possible to get it today, or is that something that we have to wait until August, or?
It's on
No,
Tableau, right?
Yeah, all I need to do is take screenshots for you. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah, it's on
it's
Tableau
real
too.
quick.
If you wanted to go on APS
I'm new here.
Insight.
I didn't.
I-
didn't
No,
look at the
no,
tab.
no, no. 90 days. Your 90-day probationary period is up.
So I think to revisit the question about the policy, from the student services lens, it's that marriage between the attendance policy, the discipline policy, the MTSS policy, the retention and placement policy. Those all have to work together. To your point, like replicating those services and supports in our schools, we can do that. We have our mental health partnerships. We have a lot of Chris 180. We have a lot of violence prevention groups with groups like the Hope Hustlers and Hopeful Change and those different groups. We just need to glue it together. So if the policies are glued, then that gives us kind of the lane to then turn around and glue it together at the schools. We're leaning hard into our MTSS structures next year. So that, again, getting everyone around one table, not this group talking about this 10 kids, this group talking about this 15 kids. We can't look at it like that. And for so long, discipline was over here, attendance was over here, and they're one child. And so we need to huddle up around these kids and support them earlier too, and be more intentional about these transition years. I'll just give a shout out to Washington. I'm working with them all day tomorrow, looking at their incoming ninth graders and going ahead and looking at all of their past data and do what interventions are we going to go ahead and start these kids in day one to make sure that they're supported. We have that data, so to just stay in front of it, I think is going to be really important.
Did you have some other suggestions in terms of things that we should be looking at in terms of the policy lens?
Just my out of the box ideas. Because that really gets to what you were saying about dropout risk. When you read the why behind those Texas bills, it's that students that are already identified as homeless or unhoused and students that are already identified as being in DFACS custody, they're already at huge risk to drop out. So then we're going to double down and suspend them on top of that. It's just, it's all so together. And even like with the attendance and discipline, students that skip a lot may get an OSS for repeated offenses. But they're already skipping, so why are we then sending them home too? So this is that marrying of policy work that we're trying to put all together.
I'm sorry. I do think these are things we need to look at. There just doesn't seem to be a lot of logic in sending a kid to OSS when there's no out-of-school place for them to go.
Yes.
And the idea of sending a kid to OSS for skipping school is just ludicrous.
It's like canceling your gym membership because you don't go.
Yeah.
And want to get them
At
in
least
shape.
that saves you money, but I definitely, we need to look at those from a policy or regulatory point of view. But what might be most helpful, Ishay, is if we asked y'all to come up with a list of changes like that you would like to see based on the audit, and then let us consider them. Would that be helpful?
Definitely, that was going to be the next part of the conversation. But even before then, not only that, I think the concrete data that we're talking that we're requesting, like the subgroups, and particularly similar to, I think, the discipline summaries, just kind of seeing the magnitude of the, the actual raw data, because there are a lot of numbers that are floating out there about our discipline data, but when you really look at it, it's a small percentage of our students, and so I think the conversation truly should change into what we're just talking about. What are some of those spaces, resources, partnerships that we can really double down and support and dispel the notion that it's this huge discipline issue in the district. The effects and magnitude certainly are, and so we also want to make sure that we are addressing them with the appropriate subgroups and those circumstances, ELL, like all of those key things. And so I think if we can get just a breakdown of the subgroup data, and then to Cynthia's point, the recommended recommended policy changes and what that looks like in our discipline policies, definitely for the committee's consideration. I think that will be great.
I should be able to get some of that data tonight, but I don't want to be in Washington tomorrow, so maybe Monday at the
Okay.
latest.
No problem, no problem. And I know we're on recess next month, so definitely we can put it for, we can put it for August meeting, August meeting for sure.
Yeah, and when we do the subgroups, I think specifically because the policy interventions you showed us were around our unhoused students as well as our students who are currently in DFACs. If we could have some data on what their suspension rates, discipline rates, ISS, OSS is as well, so that we know, is there a need, what is the gravity of the need, and then we can track what is the impact should we create an intervention.
Yeah, I know we have the unhoused category easily available, but the DFACS is going to take us a minute, but we can definitely get it, especially if we were considering something like this. I think that's also important. So I'll work on it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any other?
Like the no OSS for tardies. I was asking if any of this is regulatory or if it's in policy, like what can we actually impact?
So because we're a charter system, we've got good flexibility on what we can do for discipline. And for the record, this is not a legal opinion, but just my opinion. I agree it's silly to keep kids out of school that are missing school. You're kind of reifying the problem.
Right.
So we can certainly have flexibility on that in a way that makes sense.
We would be setting a precedent with that too in Metro Atlanta. That would, I think, be a really good one to set.
I like it.
Board Member Brooks that I was making sure they emphasize. There's some by some state law like that, the dangerous weapon piece. There are some zero tolerance ones that
Yes.
we can't. Yeah, so definitely just want to put that out there. Put that out there as well.
Did we ever circle back around to whether or not we could extend the prohibition on OSS from K through 3 to K through 5?
No, we didn't. That was the basis of this conversation. Remember, we wanted to look at the data to see. So I think it is something that, now that we know what that is, what the administration recommends.
And so, let me just clear up, if we go back to, which slide is it, Chelsea?
Oops.
No, we do, in limited circumstances, suspend students even at those younger grades. And, that's been shown in the data here, and we're talking about the most egregious situations. There is no policy prohibition against that. As a practice, Chelsea and Lincoln and their team, look very carefully at offering to students all the supports they need so that we can avoid that out-of-school suspension result. But if you want to just provide any more color about how those determinations are made or the types of instances, but there are students, even at the lowest grades, who are sometimes given out-of-school suspension.
Yeah, I think to just reinforce what Deputy Superintendent Long said is that we don't have a prohibition on OSS at K3. That's definitely a misconception that's out there. Of course, we, especially in this year's Code of Conduct, have reduced level 2 and 3 offenses significantly for the elementary grades. So having that as being an option, but it is still an option. So it would, if we were considering that, I just think it's really important that the misconception is cleared up, that there isn't a current. And that's also why we asked and did the landscape to see if any other districts around us did K3, K5, and no one has that. So
is it accurate to say that we don't have a prohibition because there are, carve-outs for, you brought a loaded weapon or whatever the case? Is that why we're saying that it does not exist? Because I'm trying to understand what is the difference between, this policy here, the 20-2-742, students in grade pre-K through third grade will not be expelled or suspended from school for more than 5 consecutive or cumulative days during the school year without first receiving a multi-tier system of supports, such as response to an intervention. So is this something that does not exist for middle school, does not exist for high school? Are they essentially given more autonomy to go to different disciplinary action at a faster speed than you can through K through 5? I'm just trying to understand what's different.
Yeah, and where I think some of the confusion came up is it was in the last year or two, don't quote me on the year, is that the state of Georgia was proposing that kindergarten through 3rd grade could not receive out-of-school suspension. That didn't pass.
Got you.
This passed, that you had to intervene after that 5 cumulative or 5 consecutive days. This requires the intervention piece. There is no legislation or policy that still says that we can't suspend. But also, yes, you can't go as fast in K3 with our code of conduct.
But this here makes it so that the school has to engage in an intervention before giving the OSS. So there's kind of like a cool down period, if you will, right, between the administration and the student. Like you can't just go, I don't know, you did one of the dreaded Ds, like disrespect or something, right? Something
Insubordination,
arbitrary,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like you were disrespectful, so now you got 2 days, right? So
Yeah.
You kind of remove the ability to do that with the smaller kids, but they lose essentially the safety net from adult reactions.
Yeah, and they can still go to 5 before you even do that. So
And so does it not make sense to say that between your data, your chart here, that once our kids lose this protection from adults at 3rd grade, that I'll just call it aggression of adults towards students in regards to discipline kind of ramps up?
Well,
can't say with certainty, but I think it's too new. This is too new for me to put those dots together. This is still a very, very new legislation.
So the policy has only been in place like a year, or this
Yeah,
last
it's
school
very
year?
new, yes.
Got you.
And keep in mind, Lincoln mentioned earlier how we've embedded progressive discipline practices within the student code of conduct so that each offense, some adult can see, oh, here are alternatives to the in-school, the out-of-school.
They used to be 2 completely separate documents. You would have to flip to that progressive discipline. Now it's right there for you.
Got you. Will we benefit by extending this policy through 7th grade
Middle school?
to middle school?
Middle
Because
school?
we see a huge jump, and I think you had made a point, kind of sidebar between you and I. You were like, well, from K through 5, you have so much consistency of expectation. You're kind of in the same building typically throughout that time. Then you get into a new building, new environment. The expectations have probably changed. And then you get into a new environment in high school, expectations change, and then real life starts staring you in the face, and so you start chilling out, right? Kind of how it goes.
They
Well, I
drop
like
back
teaching
to
seniors.
12th grade.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I teach seniors,
Now I
right?
drop half.
So, and the reason why I'm asking this is if we extended this kind of, and listen, I'm not trying to, there's a lot of teachers who are in the thinking of, students act up, they get sent to the office, they come back with a bag of Takis, right? So I'm not trying to perpetuate that lane of thinking, but what I am saying is that I think, listen, man, when you work in the field, sometimes you forget kids are kids, right? And I think a lot of times adults lose their patience, and I think it becomes very normalized and easy to just suspend kids or say, I don't like your attitude today, or whatever the case may be, and you go to ISS or you go to OSS or you can go to alternative school. I done seen you 4 times this school year. I'm done with it. Like it happens. And so how do we disrupt that? Like how do we get adults to start
And I think
looking at
that's,
alternatives first?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
I
you're
think
fine,
that's the work of the Office of Student Discipline. We have to be more intentional, I'll use your word, more aggressive with looking at the data on a weekly basis. And we've done that even with tribunal hearings, group fights per high school and middle school, and we've looked at it. We've gone and spoken to some administrators, and going forward, we want to be even more consistent. And if we see a school and already you're at a certain number of suspension days and it's mid-September, we need to get in and figure out, okay, what layers of support do you need? And as well as this is to me a safety net. What other types of safety nets can we incorporate to prevent your suspension data from going up? I will say this, and just again, being in elementary school and high-fiving pre-K and kindergarten students, and even seeing little scuffles, that physical altercation that happens between two 8-year-olds is so vastly different than that of two 16-year-olds. And that's why we have to be really, really careful in extending that layer of, in my opinion, grace and flexibility, because when you get to as early as 6th grade, definitely 7th or 8th, the level of severity in reference to the infractions, it increases drastically.
But we agree that this does not include things like violent acts or bringing a weapon or something. In my mind, those things are different, right? Those are outliers in comparison to some of the other things that may be more.
Well, what's not listed on here, and these are the things I'm thinking about when I compare my 2nd grader to my 10th grader, and that's a 10th grader, let's say, walking through the high school, and we just found out that he's distributing or selling illegal products, or that group fight between 8, 9, 15 students in the cafeteria has just completely disrupted the school environment, versus don't see it as much with the 1st grade lunch or the 2nd grade. So again, and just being on all 3 levels and seeing the students and engaging, elementary, middle, and high school is just different when you get to middle through high school.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in a little bit too. Board Member Brooks and Mr. Woods, I think you all are talking about the same thing. I think a lot of it is training for teachers, because what you talked about is someone saying Danielle is being disrespectful because she rolled her eyes at you, or Danielle, you're going home for 2 days for that. And no matter if you're in 2nd grade or 8th grade or 10th grade, that's no reason to go home. So that's training with staff, with leadership, and setting the expectations, because we know on that breakdown of schools, there are schools that never suspend kids, almost, unless it's one of those things that you have to go home for. Those other things, someone talk with them, work with them, and you set the culture that's you're not going home for that. So I think a lot of it we have to do as our system. We have to train, from your office, but also have that expectation that we're consistent across north, south, east, and west side of our town, of our city. So I think it's more training, because I think we can go for a long time.
How do we normalize that expectation though, from the superintendent's perspective?
I think you normalize it by setting it from the superintendent all the way down to the people that supervise schools, because Lincoln doesn't supervise schools. Associate superintendents supervise those principals. So setting the expectation, monitoring that data, making that so when you check in school, you're looking at attendance data, you're looking at suspension data, like, hey, I see these kids are being suspended. Let's look at the infractions. So having those conversations, what gets monitored gets done.
And I will say from my office, we get a chance to give pushback when it's a school referring a 10-day referral, or it's, again, a situation that's happened in a school building. They feel like, hey, I think these 2 students, based on this incident outside of a basketball game, they need to be referred to alternative settings. So oftentimes we will give pushback. We're not always the most liked in the district, because we will say to an assistant principal, based on the historical data, this is the first incident from this student, and can we consider some alternatives to suspension?
Dr. Battle, I think it would also be helpful for us to, in the future, be able to see weapon infractions as well as physical altercations, and maybe from like a 3 to 5 year lens, to see maybe pre-pandemic, during pandemic, post-pandemic, like what has been going on.
And I think we actually have, but not for this committee, but the board. Like, we had an actual presentation. I want to say annual one, actually. So maybe we can pull the last one that was done last year and the last 2 years, because it's a presentation that they do in front of the board that has all of those pieces, which is why I think Cynthia and I were kind of shaking our head to understand some of these pieces, but definitely let's get you that information so you'll have that institutional knowledge there. And then I'm also thinking just this conversation as we're talking about OCGA 22742 and a possible extension on our end, since we do have this flexibility that you shared. Madam General Counsel, from as we explore the policy considerations that you're thinking about, looking at the numbers from the 4th and 5th grade pieces, because when you look, there's not a huge margin of difference between 3rd and 4th, versus we see this double in 5th. I think this goes back to us wanting to doing a deeper dive of the raw data to understand, like, what does it look like? What are those infractions? and having the administration thoughts and expertise on possibly what could an extension to 5th grade look like at the elementary space. And then I'm also thinking about, Dr. Battle, to your point, the training piece, because what, Board Member Brooks and I were saying, like, there's like that jump that happens. Clearly 5th, they leave elementaries, a jump happens middle school, they leave 8th grade, clearly a jump is happening 9th. And I think for us laying on, thinking about what you're saying, training, transitions, those pieces, and having some more information about that. So for our August meeting, is there something that we can also have, just kind of looking at the data between what's happening at the 4th and 5th grade level, and having your thoughts and expertise and consideration on what a possible extension of 22,742 could be for APS, in addition to those other policy considerations that you all would talk about or really love. Just to set some action steps.
We could pull you like the top 10 offenses by grade level. Is that kind of, and like number of days? Would that kind of get at the?
Yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
Absolutely. Because I think there's a growing conversation and a concern. It's something that we've been actually talking about over the years. Even when Cynthia, I think we were first, when I chaired the policy committee meeting at that time, we instituted the progressive discipline policy based on this conversation of what are we doing in this space. And so I think we are here to have a conversation on the extension we know it's pre-K to 3, but what does it look like to possibly be a district to expand that in the elementary space, with that, additional interventions of support. So at least we are kind of training and molding our students to handle issues elementary, with our fingers crossed that they take those skills and it's transferable to middle school and
Well, middle school, those are those weird years, man.
well, scientifically, the children.
I'm telling
Middle
you.
schoolers are just
Yeah,
different.
no.
Yeah, I just went to go see Inside Out last night. And it is explaining all of this. Yeah, y'all got to go see it.
Scientifically, the children
Yeah.
go through a transformation in those years. I think people underestimate it. As a psych major, that was just something that we, like, their brains literally go through a change, a shift that we often underestimate. But that will be good if we can just kind of have some of those pieces, and that helps us set the stage of moving this forward when we meet in August, if that's okay.
Yeah, and I also think we need to break it down by clusters, because it's important to see all across.
Yeah.
Just
We'll also
making sure
pull
we keep
out
our
Charter
kids
Partner
equitable.
and show you that separately too.
Yeah.
And I just want to point out too, we currently have 17 PBIS schools. And the state is actually, and I'm very excited about this, the state is combining the PBIS, MTSS work, so they're getting rid of their silos too. So I'm very excited to see what kind of the future of that work looks like, and being able to expand that across APS in the coming years would be pretty exciting if it all makes sense.
Great. Any other questions, you guys, for?
No, just thank you for the policy suggestions and stuff you
That
brought
was
from
good.
Texas and things like that. It'll be good to dig into. Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem.
you.
Thank you all so much. All right, so now we'll move to discussion item C, which is the community engagement policy. You should have a copy of it here. Cynthia, want to make sure you have it. Yeah. This one, okay. So this is Mr. Gaither. Can I turn it over to you, just kind of give a overview? Well, not turn it over to you, but any additional, this came out of our work with SOFG, correct?
Yeah, so this was a recommendation from board member Katie Howard, just around the work around SOFG, on how, a recommendation to the board on how to engage with the public. And it also draws a tad bit from the constituent services policy that we currently have on the books. And so she was looking to just try to figure out how do we structure
Okay.
strategic engagement with community.
Okay. Okay. Madam Deputy Superintendent, have you had an opportunity to? Got it, okay. So what we'll do for today is just kind of, if we can, just kind of look at it, overview of it. And then if my colleagues, so if we can think through think through next steps in terms of moving this forward. What I do know about the community engagement plan, we've been talking about, which Pierre talks about, we do have constituent services or constituent engagement policy on the books. This does a deeper dive into kind of explicitly calling out some of the key things that we want to make sure that is done. And so this could easily be broken into parts to be a regulation in that a merging of some of the language, but also regulation in the policy. You will see in the second paragraph, the first two lines is the board shall go out as a unit on a regular basis no less than 4 times a year and no less than 5 members in attendance. Meetings will be held in different quadrants of the city and in locations that are accessible via public transportation and can accommodate a large audience. Meetings will be in person, but will also be live streamed and recorded to increase access to information shared. So we already do, if I'm clear, we already do these practices from this second paragraph. I think what this does is just really explicitly lay it out and codify it in terms of our next steps. Am I gauging that correct, Mr. Gaither?
Yeah, so, yes, to your point is to go out collectively as a unit, but also to go out collectively specifically towards the goals and guardrails
Yes.
that you guys have set. So you host your district meetings, but this would be an opportunity to kind of create some parameters around how you go out as a unit and what
Gotcha.
you were discussing.
Yeah, and I just saw that sentence. So that sentence in bold, the purpose and focus of these meetings will be to provide updates on the board goals and guardrails and monitoring of progress. Maybe that needs to be moved at the top and be actually its own, and actually be a subsection, since these pieces cater straight to that. That can be something for consideration there. And then I know there's a second portion here in terms of student voice. We do have our student advisory policy. Our student advisory council policy in place. This also pertains to the student advisory council response to the board progress on the goals and guardrails. Additionally, an annual report to the council on the progress, and will respond annually. Okay. Sorry, looking at this. So this actually should be, I think, an even more larger subset of soft G, because this is focused on communicating, gathering feedback, particularly when it comes to our goals and guardrails.
And that's correct. I believe, and that's correct. And I believe what Board Member Howard was really trying to push is that the soft G process requires you all to go out to speak specifically to what you guys have elected to do as a board. And so she was just trying to make sure there was some type of focus that was on that annually to make that happen.
Anything?
Question about the framing of this community engagement plan. It clearly reads as a community engagement plan for the board, and I think it's going to be very helpful. I wonder if there is an expectation or a thought from board members about how or whether this relates to how the administration sets up its community engagement work. Because there are some similarities that I see just at a quick glance, but of course, some things that we do differently just by the nature of what we're communicating or how we're engaging. I just want to clarify that this is not meant to be copied and pasted onto a community engagement plan for the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what it should be is something that's looked at in partnership, in terms of setting up parameters or opportunities. I think, we want to be very mindful of the community's time and maximize the time as much as possible. So I would easily say, to your point, I think we should be working in partnership, and what that, what currently the administration have in place to communicate the goals and guardrails, and what are those checkpoints. To your point, how can the board kind of marry that with the board work and engagement as well? And then for us, what does that look like as a document of just accountability? I don't see this being an actual policy. I look at it as like more of a regulation, and even just part of like the documents that we've created, like the calendar, all those key pieces in regard to soft G, because it could change, so.
I'm sorry, and Madam Chair, I just want to remind current board members, we created a community engagement guide, and again, I think this was to kind of create a plan because we didn't have it was to give us time to identify, and so we captured a lot of the actions of the board in that guide that we put out. But I think the goal here is to have an official plan on behalf of the board.
Gotcha. Okay. Any thoughts, Cynthia or Shivi?
I share a lot of the concerns. If we had this rise to the level of a policy in and of itself, we would then have to determine what the consequences are for not having 5 members in attendance at a community event, for instance, or not having. There are a lot of requirements here that we would then have to implement consequences for. And I don't know that we want to do that, although we certainly hope and expect that the board would be able to comply with this. It feels like maybe, and I know there's been some further work done on that community engagement guide. Maybe it's time to look at that again and beef it up a little, make it a little, give it a little more in the way of teeth, and include this quite specifically as an element of the community engagement guide. Even see if there's appetite on the board for bringing that to the level of a community engagement plan. We have different board members now, and we might, while there was some opposition on the board that we presented that to back when I was chair of the Board Development Committee, when we developed that, we might have sufficient support on the board for turning that into something that has more impetus and more impact on the board's behavior. And I would be very much in favor of seeing that.
So, question, is this something that we feel should stick with us on the committee, or should we move it to board development and then come back to us?
Maybe you could consult, yes, Chair of Policy Review. I consulted with, actually at the time I may have been chair of both. So I didn't need, but we even had a joint meeting where we had a joint meeting of the Policy Committee and the Board Development Committee where we worked out the details of the community engagement plan. Maybe we need to talk about doing that again.
Yeah, let's do that. That's a great idea. What we'll do, I'll talk to Loretta that chairs the Board Development Committee, and we can see what we need to do to flesh this out and move this forward.
Okay.
Sounds good. Okay.
I think that's a good idea.
Yep. Thanks for that. Anything on your end, Mr. Brooks?
No.
Okay, cool. All right, so the next thing, so I'll get with Loretta on Board Member Baldwin on that item. The last item that we have is item D, which is continuing the conversation on the Ethics Commission. Dr. Bowden, you'll take one and pass it down. Well, what I passed down is we picked up from with the Ethics Commission piece regulation BH-R1 in terms of the organizations for the Ethics Commission. And we had an initial list that's always been a part of the policy, like the Atlanta Bar Association, Atlanta Council of PTAs, Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education, and was consistently and have consistently ran into the issue of having appointees for these organizations to be able to have a body big enough to codify as 7 members for the Ethics Commission. We moved forward with adding additional lists of organizations to add and consider, like Kennesaw State College of Education, Georgia State's Andrew Young School of Public Policy, the Georgia NAACP, the Carl Vinson Institute at UGA. And so today we're going to have a conversation. We left off with at least contacting these organizations in terms of interest. with the magnitude of this work, today want to have a conversation and a quick, not a quick one, but a quick change for the board to consider, well, for this committee to consider. Instead of having the actual explicit list of these organizations, how about the removal of the actual list and incorporate language that states that the organization, that the creation would be from a list of organizations that focuses on, you know, however we want to build out that criteria. And so what we are doing is, what I think a policy should do is be that umbrella, and then whatever fits under, you know, whatever covers the umbrella, we have the fluidity to be explicit about versus be locked into this list.
I like the idea. My only feedback is kind of at the top it says, following community organizations and appointed by the board in this order until 7 members are appointed. So you got 9 board members, you've got 7 spots. I'm wondering if we could potentially get into some issues there, if maybe that number should be 9 and not 7, that perhaps every board member gets to appoint a person, kind of like the ethics commission, I'm sorry, the
Audit,
equity commission.
yep, equity and audit, we can
Right?
point, yeah.
Correct, right? Something to that effect.
To be clear, the board members are not appointing members of the Ethics Commission.
Because it's for,
In
it's a,
fact, this whole process is designed to keep board members very, very far away from the members of the Ethics Commission in order to avoid any conflicts or any appearance of impropriety or influence. What they are appointing, what the original, this was all done as part of the original SACS work back during the accreditation crisis in 2010 and 2011. And the idea was that these organizations were put on the list by board members, and then the organizations appoint individuals to the Ethics Commission. We have 7 members of the Ethics Commission, and honestly, we've had so much trouble getting 7 members, I'm not sure we want to add to the membership of the Ethics Commission. But we may want to take out the phrase "in this order."
yeah, definitely. That's a good point.
And then when we need a member of the Ethics Commission, then we can do a more general call out to the organizations on the list, and then we take them in the order in which they are received until we have the number we need. That's why we don't have a functioning Ethics Commission right now, is we can't get these 9 organizations to give us 7 Ethics Commission members.
Thank you. I guess then my question is, if we remove the list and we have a criteria, then who do we know to call? How does that work?
So let me say that was going to be my question as well, is if you're going to remove the list of organizations, you've got to have some mechanism for determining who you're going to reach out to. You can put the organizations in an exhibit to this regulation, which is fine. But I would imagine that exhibit would need to come back to this committee as well if it needed to be changed, which is okay. But you've got to have something to work with and some sort of consensus about who you're going to be reaching out to. And as far as the number of Ethics Commission members, the charter, the Atlanta Charter, states that the Ethics Commission will be a 7-member commission. So,
Can we just take this list and propose it as a revision to the full board, as a revision to the regulation?
sure, absolutely. And you might want to remove the language of, they'll be appointed in this order, and do an
Yeah.
all call to all of these organizations,
Yeah.
and the first 7 that make the cut, they make the cut.
I'm just looking to see if there's the need to change any of the, beyond removing, is there the need to change any of the language? It doesn't appear to be.
My only question is, and I don't know if it needs to say this or not, but it doesn't say how an organization will declare a representative or a trustee for the commission. And it does say each organization will have the opportunity to refill its seat if the Ethics Commission member resigns, but it doesn't say how someone resigns. And again, I don't know if it's necessary to have, but I would imagine we might want some formalities listed there, very much in the same way as we just did for equity.
Yeah, I think, if I can remember, and then Nina, please, when we had this I know this conversation, that's sort of like the responsibility and integrity of what these organizations are, which is why that's why it's not fleshed out in terms of us defining somebody that resigned, right? The Atlanta Bar Association, they'll have, with the change of their leadership, they'll have someone that may not no longer be there and just resign because they're no longer there. But the Atlanta Bar Association is known for the cadre of high quality people that they bring to the organization. I think it was just more so of the trust in it for what the integrity of these organizations stand for, which is why they're on the list, just to make that decision. Anything?
But Board Member Brooks, you raise a good point, and that the language does say that each organization has the opportunity to refill its seat. But what you're contemplating right now is that no one has a seat. It's an all call,
Right.
and the first 7 that come in. So maybe the thing to do is that the Atlanta Board of Education will appoint a replacement if a member resigns.
Yeah.
So it's not that the Atlanta Bar Association gets to recommend someone else because the person
They don't have an actual seat anymore. If we go from a fluid list, that's a good point.
Once we
That's a
have,
good catch, too. Good.
once we have a lot more organizations, it makes less sense to say the Atlanta Bar Association gets to replace its own commission member. I also, is there any way we can get this up on the screen so that the community can follow? And also, there's another whole page that we don't have in print. It doesn't actually end with members of the Ethics Commission shall be compensated. By the way, do we want to revisit that? They get paid $150 a day for every day they serve? Is that in the charter?
That is not in the charter.
And I do just want to be honest, since I've been here, we have not paid, no one has asked or requested or accepted $150 per day. We just usually say thank you with lunch in that whole process, but I do just want to acknowledge that.
Did we take that out?
You guys are.
I think it's on us.
I mean,
to y'all.
seven people times $150 a day, that gets expensive quickly. And I would hope that the people being asked to serve, that this would not be an onerous task for them, and secondly, that they would view it as public service. There's also the Ethics Commission elects its own chair. I'm going through this because we don't have it. The board may remove a commission member for neglect of duty, misconduct in office, a disability, rendering the member unable to discharge the office, or for no longer qualifying pursuant to Section 2. No regularly scheduled meetings. Majority of commission members may call a meeting. Do we need to look at whether the chair needs to be the one to call the meeting?
It's silent in the charter, so and that might be a decision for the Ethics Commission itself to make for how they govern themselves.
Yeah. Nina, do we still need the language, or I don't know if you have it up, towards the bottom talking about the Ethics Commission members as of August 21st, 2011? Were asked to resign to make way for a new appointment procedure. Do we need to include all of that?
That's pretty aged, so I think that can be removed. If
And H, which says the newly reconstituted effective date was August 22nd. I am interested to see within 60 days, the Ethics Commission will publish a set of procedures.
And that is
Also,
up to,
pretty sure has not ever happened.
yeah, that is up to this committee and its judgment.
Okay. I think we need that.
Mr. Gaither, if you please make me a panelist, I'll share my screen.
What was the last point you made, Cynthia?
The very last item is item J, which says within 60 days of Constitution, the Ethics Commission will publish a set of procedures, something else that I'm pretty sure has not actually ever happened, and or has happened so long ago that I think they probably we need to be sure that happens.
All right, so for the sake of the meeting and today's topic in terms of the list, because this wasn't an initial topic on the agenda, and making sure that these documents are on Assembly for the community to be able to access moving forward. For the list, are we in agreement just in terms of keeping this list, like, what was it? Did you say move it to an exhibit, or this is a regulation, so it's not the actual policy. It could be the language of, we have it shall be recommended by, or may be recommended by the following community organizations.
I don't know that there's going to be a functional difference between keeping the list in the regulation versus the exhibit, if the exhibit's
Yep.
going to have to come back to this body anyway, so just leave it here.
Yeah, just leave the list here, but we'll change the language of removing in this order, making it more just fluid in terms of this is the list that the board officer or whoever the entity is will work through to get 7 members appointed for if there's a need to address an ethics complaint against a board member.
And removing the language about an organization having the opportunity to refill its seat.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that catch.
Also, I think there are just a couple of other things that need to come out to clean this up, if you're willing to do that.
Well, we don't have the whole thing in front of us, for first off.
Okay,
And and then for also wanting to, Eric, I think you wanted to say something?
No, I think you all made my point.
Which line item was that?
Oh, the refilling its seat is at the top. It's the last sentence of the
Gotcha.
creation.
Okay. Mr. Gates, I knew you were going to say something? No, I was just saying. Okay. All right, and what was the other pieces?
Under organization, item A, can you roll down?
Compensation.
Under,
So the charter does say
Item-
that they will be compensated at a rate determined by the board. So,
did we determine the rate to be 0?
I mean, I think you should want to propose that. I mean, we're a committee. I understand I understand where you are, but I do want to make sure our colleagues have an opportunity to really be, to think through this as well. So what are we proposing?
May I make a procedural suggestion?
Go ahead.
That we, as we usually do, create a marked up version. We recommend it at the August board meeting. And in the meantime, well prior to that meeting, we circulate the revisions to the full board and specifically solicit feedback prior to that meeting. We can even do it as a discussion and action item if we want to be sure to include everybody. That might be a very good idea at the August meeting. But if we don't make the suggestions, then we can't get the response.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. What I'm asking is, I do want to be able to make sure that we go through this and clean up everything and have those key changes appropriate. When we haven't even had our deputy, who's our also policy advisor, to be able to look at this, have not had guidance, counsel from our general counsel on this, want to be able to at least make sure that this is fleshed out as clean as possible, and also appreciate that July is recess for everyone as well. So we can propose those changes, and I can put it out to the board. But and we can talk about the responses that we need. But I definitely want to make sure that we are cleaning this up, because we have had this conversation for years. So definitely, if I'm going to do it, if I'm going to chair it, I want to get it right. So I think that is something. Nina, were you going to say anything?
Could I recommend that the committee just have a discussion and redline it in real time about what y'all reach consensus on? And, it doesn't sound like there's too much to clean up. And then pass it around to the full board. It can be a discussion and action item for the August meeting, and if the board determines that's not enough time given the July recess, that's perfectly valid, but, doing what we can today.
Yeah. Look, my recommendation, Board Member Risco Brown, if you're willing to meet, I would say even closer to your side than in the middle. If we put maybe like $50 up there, which is kind of like what you get for jury duty, $50 as the number. I can understand where you are on the $150 amount. I completely get it.
I don't think we have a budget for the Ethics Commission.
Well, and that was actually going to be my next question, right? So where does the money actually come from to pay for this?
Also,
And notice that
I was just getting ready to go there.
there's a provision that says if the workload requires staff assistance, independent staff support up to $6,000 per year will be secured by our illustrious board executive assistant. So I don't know if that means independent sources or there's a separate budget item, but given that we don't have a quorum yet, that is not a question that has come up.
Right. I don't have a problem with $50 a day. Again, I'm hoping that the people that are going to be nominated by these organizations will consider this a public service. Is it $50 a day for jury duty or 25? I thought it was
I thought it was up to 40, maybe?
Oh.
Well, and also, I
Whatever.
want you to know, I brought that up as the red line number, so then we could even have conversation about it being 0, but I think just putting it at 50 at least allows us to start the conversation, and then...
I'm okay with just, 50. I think of $150, particularly if we have a complaint that requires a great deal of time and energy and meetings, could get very expensive for something we do not have a budget line item for.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair conversation to have with all of our colleagues here, and then we can move forward from there, because, I see things very much the way that you do on this particular issue. But I just believe it gives us a starting point.
All right. Are we ready to move on to another item in here? Okay. Do we want to take out the $6,000 per year allotment of staff support?
And a limit is also nice.
Yeah.
And there's also the opportunity to look for third-party sources to help fund that as well.
I do think I'm sorry to go back up to item C, we might want to add a sentence that says a commission member may resign by submitting in writing to the chair of the Ethics Commission and perhaps the chair of the board.
That's what I was alluding to earlier.
Yeah, because you're right. Do we want to continue in D, saying a majority of commission members have to call the meeting? Well. Okay.
What is-
Okay.
Is quorum 4?
Okay.
On item H, the newly constituted Ethics Commission will, I'm sorry, not that one.
G.
I. The Ethics Commission members will receive appropriate training before taking office. God bless you. Training from who?
Yeah.
So in the past, we've worked with Emory University. They would send someone over to actually do training for commission members prior to them engaging in the work. And I also just wanted to acknowledge,
To be explicit?
I don't,
I'm asking.
no, I got you, yeah.
You know, the training isn't even a requirement of the charter. I just think it's good practice. I would recommend that you stay silent on the organization to give yourself flexibility.
And then I also just wanted to acknowledge that in F, that also, when we're talking about additional support, there is outside counsel that we use for that I think is also included in this number as well.
Yeah, that's, there's a separate council for the Ethics Commission.
We had talked about removing G and H as being now almost 13 years out of date. Well, we don't actually have a constituted ethics commission at the moment, so I'm not sure that, I think it has died and come back to life several times since August 22nd of 2011. So, do we need it?
Not really a legal question. You don't need it. It's not illegal to have it. It's not illegal to remove it. It's up to the good judgment of this committee and ultimately the board.
I think it's just a little confusing. I think that's it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but I'll circulate these red lines today or tomorrow to the board.
Okay, thank you so much.
Good. Public comment.
We'll resume the Policy Review Committee schedule in August. Will be again the third Thursday of each month, which is Committee Day. Please be on the lookout for that notice. Is there a need for public comment?
Yes, Madam Chair. Our first, we have 3 individuals who've signed up for public comment, and then our first speaker for 2 minutes will be that of Cindy Battles. I'm sorry, I don't know. What's your name? Okay, so we're going to switch over to Tiffany Fick for 2 minutes.
Okay, hey, good to see you.
Good to see you all as well. My name is Tiffany Fick. I'm a Southwest Atlanta resident. I'm also a former APS teacher and hopefully future APS parent. I want to thank you for discussing the discipline matters and really digging into the data. And I kind of changed around my talking points based on what you said, but I wanted to just address a couple of things that have come up with the public. So based on current and state district policy, students can still be suspended without the multiple tier support system if it's less than 5 consecutive days. Mm-hmm. And based on the low numbers that we saw earlier, and with the support of over 300 community members, we're asking today that you consider amending the current discipline policy to have a prohibition on out-of-school suspension for K-5, especially given those lower rates. APS has a unique opportunity to lead the way in innovation in student discipline by reducing out-of-school suspension and mitigating the school-to-prison pipeline through restorative practices and not just the PBIS. I would like to leave you with some highlights from a 10-year Chicago Public Schools study conducted by the University of Chicago. Over a Over a decade, schools that implemented restorative practices saw an 18% decline in out-of-school suspensions without an increase in in-school suspensions compared to schools that did not use restorative practices. There were no drops in math and reading scores as more students stayed in the classroom, and Black boys saw significant improvements in school attendance and math scores, equal to closing 15% of the Black-white gap in math scores in Chicago. They also found there were 35% fewer in-school arrests, 15% fewer arrests of students in communities surrounding the school using restorative practices compared to non-participating schools. Whether a change in discipline policies was promoted by a district action or a state ban, researchers agreed that support and training for teachers and how to implement those alternative discipline approaches were essential. So just want to leave that with you in consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker for 2 minutes is Cindy Battle, followed by Lisa Michelle Glanton.
Thank you so much, board members. Again, my name is Cindy Battles. I am the policy director with the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. I think you, during your questions and that kind of thing, addressed a lot of our concerns. I think the data that was shown failed to really show the public like the impact of housing insecurities, food insecurities, living in under-resourced communities and that kind of thing, because you already said, right, it's not just like 2.35 days per student. There's a small section of students who are being suspended for a great number of days. So I do hope moving forward, as you discuss this, you look at more intervention practices, restorative practices, that kind of thing. I actually really appreciate the suggestion to extend those interventions to 7th grade, if not even higher. I don't know why we're giving children out of school suspension unless they're a danger to other students. I actually think, also to go back to something that was mentioned about the disparity amongst race, our data shows something like 86% of the students who are being suspended, getting OSS, are Black students. So I think that that's another thing that should really be addressed as we're moving forward in this, is looking at that disparity and how we can decrease it. That's all I have, but I look forward to seeing y'all in August. Thank you.
Lisa Glanton, if you are in the queue, can you please raise your hand? Okay. Sorry, we're just checking just to make sure. All right, our next speaker will be Michaela Arcega. Can you hear us? Michaela?
Yes, thank you so much.
You have 2 minutes.
Okay, great. Hello, y'all. My name is Michaela Arciaga. I'm the Georgia Advocacy Director for the Intercultural Development Research Association, RDRA. We are an independent, nonpartisan education, civil rights research, and advocacy nonprofit. I'm also a resident in Districts 4 and 8 and a former APS teacher. I won't beleaguer the same points that have been made by other speakers today. I also appreciate that you guys are facilitating this conversation at this time and the data that was presented, and look forward to the new data that will be presented in August. I think the only thing we'd want to reiterate is the need for both policy and practice. And with that in mind, we would encourage you, as part of your review of the Student Code of Conduct, including a review of your evidence-based practices such as policy JGBA, which is on trauma-informed practices, and JGBB on restorative practices. We know these policies move the district in the direction that we want for our students and will help build those positive school climates we want for all of our students. But without regulations, it feels as though those policies are ultimately toothless. So the request would be consideration for adding regulations to bolster the trauma-informed practices and restorative practices policies. We also hope that the district will renew its commitment to supporting opportunity weight allotment legislation at our state capitol that would secure additional funding to help us educate our students who are living in poverty, as mentioned by Ms. Battle. We are looking forward to the continued conversation and being part of it, as well as the identification of a finalist for superintendent, and hope that these new changes will help bring some of these student-centered policies back to the forefront. Thank you again.
Madam Chair, this concludes public comment. I'm sorry. Michael Waller, we don't see you in the queue, so if you do have any comments, please submit that via Let's Talk. Thank you. This concludes public comment.
Great. Thank you all so much, community. We appreciate your thoughts and your feedback. Please continue to, if you have any additional thoughts or comments to share with us, please send them to us, particularly knowing that we're in recess, so we'll have that information available. And with that being said, the last thing that I will entertain is a motion to adjourn.
Hold on, we didn't ask about any other business.
Was there other business? Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did.
Did I miss that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm
Okay,
so
what would you
sorry.
have? Who?
No, I just wanted to put some stuff on our radar to talk about in August, specifically around AI policy. The state is going to start putting the pressure on us to create that. So I think it's something that we should be proactive about looking into and being intentional. We could go the wrong way with it. So I would like us to entertain that, as well as dyslexia policy. I believe there will be some additional regulations from the state on that as well. In combination with the AI conversation, I believe it's SB 351, considered like the cyberbullying bill. But that bill is going to require us to have some policies around internet usage, VPN, type of things. So I would like for us to be thoughtful about that, so we're not behind creating those policies.
Do you know if there's any guidance, if the state has pushed anything yet in terms of the AI piece?
I haven't seen anything about AI yet, and I don't even think that was a part of the conversation. I believe it was just around VPNs and some other things.
Or more like internet, like network security?
Correct.
And we typically get that policy guidance from the GSBA.
Right.
So once the bills are passed by the governor and we're getting closer to the time of that deadline for local boards to implement a policy, we get policy guidance and exemplars from GSBA that are vetted by their attorneys and are a good starting point for conversations we can have.
Matt Smith and I also attended a conference a few months back, sponsored by the Canadian Consulate, among other people, but focused on AI and have some materials. So when we're ready to have that conversation, we'll share those materials and see.
Yeah, I would love for us to really get on that as soon as possible. We're getting to a day and time where knowledge of ChatGPT and all the offerings are normalized for our kids, and teachers are going to be trying to figure out what do we do about this. So I would like for us to not be, we're going to be reactionary at this point anyway, but not so far behind in reacting instead of being forward thinking.
Can I ask for clarification on your thoughts around dyslexia? Are you asking for something beyond dyslexia screening, which of course is mandated by the state at certain grade levels? What are your initial thoughts around what a dyslexia policy would address?
Yeah, I think there's some additional initiatives coming from the state that I would need to do more research on exactly what is their intentionality. But I do believe screening frequency and access is going to be a big part of it. And something we want to focus on, making sure that we're addressing the needs, or first off finding out what the needs of our kids are, and then best prepared to address them.
Great, thank you. So we'll put that, we'll get some information, and as much information that you have, or any, if you have any resources, please share to move that forward as well. Anything?
That's it. I'm sorry for missing.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. It
your
happens.
agenda item.
No, it's fine, it's fine. With that being said, I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, properly moved by Cynthia Briscoe Brown, seconded by Board Member Brooks. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all so much for a great meeting, and we'll see you all in August. Thank you again.